Ahoy there, Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another ship fitting guide for EVE Echoes. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at another one of the Tech 8 attack battle cruisers, this time around the Amarr Oracle. Now this is actually one of my favourite looking Amarr ships. I love the sort of curves on this one, I love the way the armour plates and the weapons work. Being an upright ship I'm not usually a fan, but there's just something about the Oracle that looks really badass, and I especially love the way that when it's about to approach warp, you watch it all sort of close up like some kind of beetle shell closing in on itself. Very cool looking attack battle cruiser, and we've already had a look at both the Naga and the Tornado, so of course we're going to move on to the Oracle. This is a somewhat different to the others as well. It has some slightly different playstyles to it, some interesting facets due to the fact that it uses lasers and how those actually impact how a ship can work. Now ultimately what we're going to do then is have a look at what makes the attack battle cruiser an attack battle cruiser, we're going to have a look at what makes the Oracle different from the other attack battle cruisers, and then we're going to showcase some of this in action later on in the video. Now if you do enjoy this or find it useful, let me know by hitting like on it, sub to the channel for all things EVE Echoes, ding that notification bell, and make sure that you select all notifications so that you know whenever a new video goes live and a new giveaway with it, and of course let me know in the comments section down below what ships and what topics you want me to cover in future videos. We do have a Patreon if you want to go the extra mile to help support this channel. Every pledge, every dollar really helps. And recently I have opened up a merchandise shop on Redbubble. So if you've ever fancied representing the Catskull Cartel or the Catskull Academy, you now have the option of doing so, and it's excellent quality stuff. I love Redbubble to pieces. Very proud to be able to be working alongside them now. All that said and done though, let's talk about the Amarr Oracle. The Oracle is the Amarr Empire's Tech 8 attack battle cruiser. So if we head to their ship tree to the battle cruiser branch and climb it to tech level 8, here we have the Oracle. Now I've already waxed lyrical about how I love the look of this ship, very cool beetle-esque curves, all of that kind of thing. But let's spend a moment just to talk about its background. Now the Oracle was designed to break the stalemate of the Imperium War by deviating from the doctrine of brute force and heavy armour that is otherwise so prevalent in Amarr Navy doctrine. Basically, they took a look at Caldari history and saw that the Caldari had developed light maneuverable ships in order to counter the slower, heavier ships of the Gallente Federation. Now that philosophy, along with cutting-edge powertrain and ultralight alloy armour plating, led to the Oracle. I believe the Empress herself actually referred to this ship as a work of divine grace for the Empire and retribution to our enemies. Those are some strong fighting words. Anyway, so being an attack battle cruiser, what makes an attack battle cruiser an attack battle cruiser? It is of course that roll bonus. Now the roll bonus for an attack battle cruiser is the same across the board. It's a 95% reduction to the power grid requirement for the large weapon system of choice. So like with the Naga and the Talos, that is to railguns, large railguns. The Tornado gets to large cannons. Here, the Oracle being an Amarr ship, of course, that is a 95% reduction to the power grid requirement for large lasers. We also get a 50% reduction to the amount of capacity needed in order to activate those large lasers as well. Makes sense, we've got big heavy lasers, they use a lot of power grid and a lot of capacitor to fire. This ship doesn't have that amount of power grid or that amount of capacitor, so we get massive roll bonus reductions instead to allow this ship to fit those. Now, like the other attack battle cruisers as well, we're getting bonuses from Advanced Battle Cruiser Command and Advanced Battle Cruiser Engineering. And Advanced Battle Cruiser Engineering gives us a 5% increase to large laser damage and a 10% reduction, again, to the amount of capacitor required to fire those large lasers. So essentially, we're getting an additional 25% large laser damage. That means that the 6 turrets that we have are almost firing as if they were 8 turrets. That is an insane amount of firepower. Remembering they are large lasers as well, which do a lot of damage per hit. Plus we're getting that extra reduction, 50% additional capacitor need reduction thanks to the advanced engineering skill. Now, Advanced Battle Cruiser Command is going to give us a 5% reduction to inertia modifier and a 5% increase to scan resolution for each level of training. Obviously that's 25% less inertia and 25% higher scan resolution at full Advanced Battle Cruiser Command 5, which you really should have if you're going to be flying these. That means you're going to be able to lock onto your targets quicker, and you're going to be able to maneuver much more around the battlefield. Remember that idea there of using light maneuverable ships to counter slower heavy ships. That's kind of what the Oracle is aiming to be as far as battle cruisers go here. Anyway, let's look at its attributes and fittings. So in regards to its fitting profile, the Oracle has one drone tube. This can launch either small or medium drones. Those are very much going to be a supplemental weapon system, as you'll see later. We've got 6 high slots which can fit those large turrets, 3 mid slots, 5 low slots, 3 power grid combat rigs, and 3 mechanical rigs. We actually have a humongous power grid here on the Oracle as well. 1024 megawatts means we are not at all wanting for space when it comes to fitting this thing, and there's a lot of fun we can have with that, as you'll see in a moment. Defensively speaking, despite being supposedly small, lighter and more maneuverable, defensively speaking, the Oracle is still pretty tanky. 27,813 as standard, the majority of which is in the armor, 8,818, with some very strong resistances across the board, 50% electromagnetic, 35% thermal, 25% kinetic, and even 20% resistance to explosive damage. Armor tank is normally pretty weak to explosive damage, but here you've got a built-in 20% resistance. That makes this astonishingly tanky, even against Minmatar and Angel anomalies and things that are using explosive damage against you. The shields are not great, I'll be honest, 5,986, just under 6,000. They're not terrible, but they are going to go down fairly quickly under any form of firepower at all. But the structure as well, 7,204 is fairly solid structure. It means if your armor tank fails for a brief moment, you do have a lot of padding before you need to really worry about getting the hell out of there. Looking at the rest of the stats here, we've got a very large capacitor bank, which you would expect from a Mars ship that's going to be firing lasers. Lasers obviously use a lot of capacitor to fire, and you can see here an incredibly intense maximum capacitor recharge rate of 18.12 gigajoules. That is a very aggressive capacitor recharge rate. That is obviously a key part here for a ship that is going to be using large lasers, and it needs to keep up with their capacitor requirements. Now, signature radius, of course, the Oracle is fairly large, 238.8, not 2,000, 233.8 meters. That's a sizable signature radius. Other ships are going to lock onto you quickly. They're going to be able to hit you without too much worry at all. We've also got a flight velocity here that is actually on the faster end of battle cruisers, especially Amar battle cruisers, of 185 meters per second. Yeah, sure, we're not going to be speed tanking anytime soon, but that is still a fairly considerable flight velocity that kind of allows us to maneuver fairly well throughout the battlefield with a fairly heavy mass, but a low inertia modifier as well, which when we take into account the Advanced Battle Cruiser Command, means we do get a surprisingly nimble battle cruiser. Okay, it's not nimble for most people's sort of imagination, but for a battle cruiser, yeah, this thing is surprisingly agile. Now, with the Oracle, we're actually going to have a look at 2 different types of fittings. The first one here is, of course, a beam laser build. We're going for that long-range kiting, similar to the Naga and the Tornado that we've already looked at. That means, of course, we're looking at large beam lasers in the high slots. Here I've gone for Corpus C-type large beam lasers. Now, the reason I've gone for these is for that range, 68.25 kilometer optimal, with an accuracy fall-off of 24.35. This means we can theoretically hit from a good sort of 80 kilometers away, and already you should be seeing why I don't recommend this build as much as the second build that we'll be looking at. Because if you want range, let's be fair, the beam lasers just don't carry the same kind of range as either rifled railguns or as strike cannons. Obviously, strike cannons are insane range. They are a lot shorter range than either of those, and honestly, 68.25 kilometers for an optimal range is still pretty short. You are going to be in sort of the damage bracket there when you come into anomalies. You're going to find a lot of things are able to hit you at that kind of range, and if you're looking at things like when your new wave spawns and you get those smaller, faster frigates and destroyers coming straight for you, especially in the storyline encounters, they're already very close to you by the time you can actively hit them. If they're at 68 kilometers, you're already looking at a situation where you're going to be struggling to hit them, thanks to that absolutely abysmal tracking speed of 3.14. That is one of the worst tracking speeds in the entire game. It's horrific. That's with bonuses and things thanks to skills. 3.14 ultimately makes for a very slow tracking, and if anything gets remotely close, you are absolutely boned. If you want to try this build though, this works okay in groups if you're going in a fleet, as long as you've got some form of close range support as well. This does do a surprising amount of damage, 1027.89 DPS, 992.77 of which is just from the turrets. That it does that at a good range of 68.25 kilometers. That's not terrible by any stretch of the imagination. The problem comes in that once something gets up close and personal to you, there it is, put it on a t-shirt, when something gets up close and personal to you, even with the target painter, even with the stasis web of fire, and even with the warp disruptor, a warp scrambler that we've got here to switch off any micro warp drives, you are still going to struggle to actually hit them. It is not an easy build. You need to be hitting everything from range with that damage. The fact that it is very high damage does help, but it has that supreme weakness that if anything gets under your guns, you may struggle to survive. That's why I don't recommend it. But if you wanted to use it in a group, that's the fit that we're looking at here. And this is exactly the same fit as the second build that I'm going to showcase, so I'm not going to dally too much on this. You'll see the mid slots there though. We have a warp disruptor, warp scrambler. In the case of a predator warp scrambler, we've got a Halley target painter, and we've got a predator stasis web of fire. Anyway, let's move on. So the build that I actually would showcase is a pulse laser brawling build. Now, I would normally refer to this as a Captain Benzie special, up close and personal brawling build, but let's be fair, large pulse lasers still have an optimal range of 35 kilometers. It's not really up close and personal at 35 kilometers now, really, is it? Anyway though, it is the shorter range of the two. We're using pulse lasers rather than beam lasers to get the higher damage, closer range, and slightly better tracking. You'll see here the damage there, DPS 198 DPS, optimal range of 35.83 and an accuracy fall off of 7.61. We're going to be wanting to mainly stick around the 35 to 36 kilometer mark, at which point we're quite capable of doing that in this battle cruiser. It's nimble enough with that inertia modifier and with the rest of the fittings we have here to maintain a 35 kilometer range from most things. For PvE, that is going to absolutely rip through your opponent's shields, as you'll see later on. The tracking speed of 7.93 is definitely better than the beam lasers, but it's still not what we would refer to as good. It's good enough to hit cruisers, battle cruisers, and battleships, but the smaller destroyers and frigates are still going to provide a problem for you unless you are prioritizing those and hitting them as soon as they come into your range. Now, in order to assist with this, of course, we have our mid slots. Starting with a Halley target painter, this of course makes the target signature radius 38.75% bigger. Bigger signature radius means they're easier to hit, and each hit is likely to do higher damage. Ultimately, this has an optimal range of 36 kilometers, which is on par with the range of our weapons as well. So as soon as something hits range, you should be absolutely optimal with both your lasers and with the target painter, making for an easy hit. That said, if it does get a little bit too close, we have a Predator Warp Scrambler at 15 kilometer range here in order to switch off micro warp drives. We've got a Predator Stasis Web of Fire to then drop the flight velocity by a further 61%, and a ship that has no micro warp drive and is moving at 39% of its standard flight velocity suddenly becomes a much easier target to hit. And we do of course have a Mark 7 infiltrator drone here as well, just to help deal some damage to anything that does get within that range. The idea is that ultimately we kill everything that is small and dangerous to us first at the optimal range of about 35 kilometers with that excessive cold DPS here of 1189.46. And you'll see that actually my drone control range on this ship is 35 kilometers as well, so theoretically at 35 kilometers I have that full 1224.59. That is a lot of DPS to kick out anything that comes within range, but theoretically if we want to try and kill it before it hits the 15 kilometer range, if it hits the 15 kilometer range we do have some recourse there with the Warp Scrambler and the Stasis Web of Fire, but you still want to try and take it out before then because that's not always enough. Now, in order to sort of support this, I've gone for an Eagle tracking computer. This, of course, increases the optimal range and accuracy fall-off of our turrets and the tracking speed. You can also activate this for a 500% increase to all of those bonuses. That means a longer range if you need to hit something while it's a little bit further away, or better tracking speed if it does get within that 15 kilometer range. We've also gone for a Centum C-type heatsink. Heatsinks, of course, increase the DPS of our lasers. That's what's allowing us to get the DPS you see currently, and of course we can activate this to heat that DPS up further. We actually go over 1400 DPS with that heatsink activated, and that's a lot of damage. That should be enough to take out anything before it gets too dangerous to us. To keep things moving and allow us some sort of range control, I've gone for a Corellum C-type medium afterburner. I find the afterburner is enough to help us maintain an orbit. We can usually blap the ships that we want to as soon as they appear, those small frigates and destroyers, and then the afterburner allows us to range control quite nicely against the cruisers, battle cruisers and battle ships without having to eat too much into our capacitor. That said, if you want to swap that for a micro warp drive, just to absolutely get the faster speeds, you can do. But remember, of course, the higher angular velocity on your side means higher angular velocity on their side. Angular velocity is mirrored. If you are moving faster compared to them, then they are moving faster compared to you as well. Imagine two cars driving down the road. If you are driving side by side, you have an angular velocity of 0. If you're driving in opposite directions, you both have a very high angular velocity, and it doesn't matter which one of you is trying to shoot the other, that angular velocity is going to be the same. So if you're using a micro warp drive, you may struggle to hit with the very low tracking speed of those laser turrets. Finally then, because we're going to be at sort of closer range, we are going to be taking hits. Corpum C-type medium armor repairer alongside a Corpus C-type adaptive armor hardener helps us maintain some tank. We do get a decent amount of resistances already on this ship's tank, which helps it survive quite nicely at these closer ranges. But the adaptive armor hardener here just increases those that little bit more, so we take a little bit less damage, and we're taking less. We're able to then repair that with the armor repairer. Now you'll notice there's a lot of power grid left here, and if you know that you're not going to be going up against too much in the way of frigates or destroyers, you can swap out any of those mid slots for a large Nosferatu, and I'll showcase that now. You'll see there, if I swap out there, we've still got enough space there to fit in a large Nosferatu. That does make his capacitor stable, although in fairness you'll see that capacitor stability isn't really an issue. Even without the large Nosferatu, we're still sitting at about 18 minutes with everything active, and if you can't kill something in 18 minutes, I'd ask what's going wrong. And theoretically, again, you shouldn't need everything active at once, because you won't have the target painter active on everything. You definitely won't have the Web of Fire or the Warp Scrambler active at all times, because you should be killing stuff before it reaches that range. But you can fit that large Nosferatu if you want to. It is possible to cram it in there. Now, in regards to the rigs, the power grid rigs I've gone for here, 1 laser collision accelerator, 2 laser burst aerators, that typical standard high DPS setup, extra damage from the activation, from the actual lasers themselves, thanks to the collision accelerator, and faster firing lasers, thanks to the burst aerators, attack both ends of the DPS equation, more damage, more shots in the time limit, and more damage per shot. On the other side of things, on the mechanical rigs, we're looking at auxiliary thrusters that just help us maneuver that a little bit faster. That helps us outmaneuver some of the frigates and destroyers in anomalies if they're getting a bit close. It gives us a bit more range, a bit more time as we power away. Yes, okay, they are still going to close on us. Of course, they're going to be moving faster, but if you are moving away from them at a decent speed as they're moving towards you at a slightly faster speed, you're still slowing down their rate of approach, if that makes sense. It buys you a few seconds just to get a few more shots in. Dynamic fuel valve, if we're going to be running an afterburner at all times, or if you're going to be running a micro warp drive, then a dynamic fuel valve just cuts down the amount of capacitor that eats, helps you maintain that stability. I have gone for a semiconductor memory cell here as well. Ultimately, you don't really need that one. You can see capacitor here is 18 minutes, 12 seconds with the setup I've got. We can easily swap out that capacitor rig for something like a targeting rig, which will allow us to lock on that little bit faster, and actually you may prefer that one. Just what I had in there for testing. Anyway, speaking of testing, let's actually undock this now and showcase it in action. To showcase the Oracle, I'm jumping into Drone Hive Investigation, which is a Gallente Tech 9 encounter. I've chosen Gallente because it's armor tank and thus the lasers are not as high damage against it, just to showcase this in non-ideal situations. You can imagine this gets better when you're up against like a Caldari anomaly. So here we are, I jumped in at about 50 kilometers. You can see I've got 2 Corelli Nemesis there to take out, a Talos 2, a Celestis 2 Covert Ops, and a Dominix. So we've got 2 frigates that I want to take out quickly. We're going to lock onto those first, and even at 50 kilometers, you see the lasers do a large amount of damage. More than enough, thanks to the target painter there, increasing the signature radius, obviously, of that ship, and it having a very low angular velocity as it's approaching. There we are, it's what, 3-4 volleys to take that out. Onto the second nemesis. Again, we're going to activate the target painter. The lasers come online now. We're going to put the tracking computer on there just for a bit of extra as well. The tracking computer didn't activate until after the laser, so we don't really get to see it in action. 2 shots, out goes that nemesis. Onto the Celestis. We're now going to actually set the orbit. 35-kilometer orbit I've got around this thing, and you'll see there the first shot takes us down into the armor of the Celestis. Second shot takes us halfway, well, 2/3 of the way into hull. That's... That's a lot of damage against something that is resistant to electromagnetic and thermal, obviously with it being an armor tank, being Galente. Yeah, we are 3 ships down on to the Talos. So what we have now, we're still just outside of my drone control range. We're going to put the target painter on it still because we don't need to worry too much about capacitor, and if we make it a bigger target, it's just more damage. There we are, 2 shots takes us through its shields and into its armor. Again, the armor is resistant to thermal and electromagnetic, which means that it's not an ideal option to take lasers against this, but you see it's still, what now, that's 3 shots there into armor. 4th volley should take us into hull. Yep, just about grazing on the side of hull there in 4 shots. That's going to be enough to come down, so we're getting ready now to orbit the Dominix and start to take that one out. At which point I'll also activate the heatsink, I think, just to help power through that a little bit faster, because obviously a Dominix being a battleship has a lot of tank to it. Here we go. So we've set the orbit around the Dominix now. Once the weapons are up and running, here we are. Still, 1/3 of its shields gone in 1 shot. We're going to activate the heatsink now, see if that increases the damage. 6,112. Pretty high damage per shot there. 7,005. We've cleared the shields. We're going to start now going through the armor, and you can see the damage does drop again because of the armor's resistances. We're still doing more than 4,000 damage per shot, and those shots are not far spaced between, fairly quick to fire. And this Dominix is not going to last long there at all. You see the shields have taken a bit of damage. We're down to just over 50% of our shields, but this is an armor tank. It's an armor tank. We don't really care about our shields. The fact is, I haven't had to activate my armor tanking modules at all in the first wave of this Tech 9 anomaly whilst brawling. I could go for the longer range, but as I said, the longer range does prove problematic in a wave where you get a few more frigates and destroyers, and certainly if you're doing public anomalies and a frigate jumps in and, like, you know, something like an interceptor whilst you're trying to do that and locks you down with a warp scrambler, etc., you are going to have a tough time against it with the pulse laser, with the beam laser build. That's why I prefer the pulse laser build that you see now. And we're nearly done with that Dominix. Still haven't gone below half shields. A couple more shots should take that Dominix out of action. You'll notice I haven't even activated the drone. We're within my 35-kilometer drone control range, but in fairness, I haven't really needed it. Next wave spawns. Again, we've got a couple of Catalyst 2 interdictors. We've got a couple of Nemesis 2s there as well. Sorry, 1 Catalyst interdictor. That, of course, is going to be a primary target for us. There we are. Need to, for some reason, we've auto-fired at the Dominix. That's a problem, because it gives the Catalyst that little bit more time to get closer. But let's activate the tracking computer for a bit more optimal range. There we go. Catalyst 2 is down to less than half its armor in 1 shot and is out of action with the second shot. We then have the 2 Nemesises next to come. We are going to move in and try and get closer to an orbit. Again, as we approach, there is going to be no optimal range there at all. No angular velocity there at all. Thinking optimal range because I wanted to check what that was with the tracking computer active, but unfortunately didn't get there in time. The tracking computer has deactivated. We'll have a look next time. But we're seeing there now, as we're getting closer to that Nemesis, we should start to hit with the next shot. Next shot, hopefully we'll score a hit on it. We'll see. Yes, there we go. Down to 2/3 of its hull remaining in 1 hit. That's going to drop off the spectrum in the next shot that hits it. Here it comes. Oh no, we missed. We missed because it's a small target. Of course we did. Hopefully we're going to take this out in the next shot or 2. It's getting close. It's getting close, and this is where we start to get into a problematic situation. Why did I turn the target painter off? Can we please have the target painter back on that? There we go, and down it goes. The other Nemesis now is at 35 kilometers. This could be a little bit close for Cull, but we'll see. We're going to get the target painter switched across to there as well. 35 kilometers. Next shot from the lasers. Nope, that's a miss. You'll see that when we do hit, we do a lot of damage, but yes, of course, there is that tracking speed taking into account. We've got to try and actually hit the blasted thing. So let's put the targeting computer on, increase the tracking speed and the optimal range. Still can't hit the blasted thing. It's because I'm orbiting it. Because I'm orbiting it, I'm adding my, it's my angular velocity, as I said, gets reflected back at me. Your angular velocity compared to a target is the same angular velocity that that target has to you. In this situation, I theoretically should turn the afterburner off so that I reduce the angular velocity, but I just want to see, like, is that Nemesis actually going to get close before we start to do anything? And simply put, no, it's really not. Those hits still do massive amount of damage when they do actually land. But you'll see, this kind of showcases exactly what I was saying about the pulse lasers. Now imagine this is beam lasers. If the pulse lasers are struggling to hit a small target at 36 kilometers, imagine how the beam lasers are going to be with less than half the tracking speed of the pulse lasers. But there we are, we're now down through those, and I'm going to send the drone in now to start cleaning these off a little bit faster. There we go. That is the Oracle in action in a brawling build. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this with the Naga or the Tornado, but they can do it. I've had fun with the Tornado doing damage with autocannons. It does work. It does work. You get some very high DPS, and autocannons do have a decent enough tracking speed as well. I just found that I preferred the more sedate approach to using the Naga and Tornado as sniper ships. It's just something I prefer. The slower, the slower, heavier ships, I tend to go for range builds, whereas my frigates and destroyers, I tend to prefer going for sort of the more personal, up-close brawling builds. It's just a personal thing. You might try it with those as well. But for the Oracle is the one I think that the brawling build really shines on, just for the sheer amount of damage that this thing can kick out. Even here against armor tanks, you're seeing me do 4,000 damage against the armor without the heatsink active. It's an incredible amount of damage. And you can take care of these Tech 9 anomalies and encounters very, very easily. Tech 10 encounters and anomalies are doable. Storyline ones are a bit trickier. Storylines you do struggle simply because you have those very fast-moving, micro warp drive frigates and things in them. Certainly, I've not tried out a Tech 10 storyline encounter with the Oracle. I did clear a Tech 6 one with it, and that was tense. It was doable. It was doable, and I don't ever feel that I was in any major danger, but it was tense. The Tech 7 ones, I think, would be a bit tougher. The Tech 8-9 storyline missions are going to be a bit of a stretch, and I don't think you can do the Tech 10 on your own. But again, a lot of people focus on these storyline missions. Oh, can it do storyline missions? Storyline missions are designed for fleets, and they're not always the best way of making money. Yeah, okay, you get 100 million ISK for completing that storyline mission, or 300 million ISK, but it's 300 million ISK for like 4 hours worth of work that is high risk to your ship. Whereas you can do these encounters, and this encounter, I'm going to earn 8 million ISK just for the encounter, plus the bounties, plus the loot. It's a lot faster. This is only going to take me literally 15-20 minutes to do. I can do 3 of these in that time, and 3 or 4 of these in the time it would take to do 1 of the storyline missions. And you just get almost as much, if not more in certain cases, ISK, plus you get a good amount of loot and that on top, and it's just lower risk than doing the storyline encounters. I find it a lot more sedate, a lot more easier to make money. But hey, that's just me. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments section down below. Of course, this is the Oracle. I am enjoying this ship. I quite like the attack battlecruisers. Next wave has come in a little bit too close for comfort there, but I know we can take care of this. Obviously, I'm just going to let this play out whilst I do the outro here. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in regards to the Oracle in the comment section down below. Are you using any of the attack battlecruisers? Are you trying these brawling builds? Are you using the Tornado or the Naga or the Talos in a brawling build? Are you trying the Oracle? Do you prefer the Oracle as a kiter? That kind of thing. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. Otherwise, folks, thank you for watching right the way to the end. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden.